Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. Before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and don't forget to subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Story 1. In a quiet rural town, there's a house that's been occupied for more than 40 years, but no one has ever seen its residents in daylight. At night, lights flicker on and off, strange shadows move past the curtains, and muffled screams are sometimes heard. Over the decades, dozens of people connected to the property have disappeared, yet no one has been charged. Now, a determined journalist decides to uncover the truth and discovers the terrifying reason those lights never go out. It began with a light. Not a sunrise, not a flickering street lamp, but a strange, steady radiance that appeared one late September night over the quiet town of Clearwater, Oregon. Locals would later call it the glow, as if it were something supernatural. But in reality, it was the opening note to a song of blood and fear that would haunt the community for years. The glow came from the old quarry road, a place most avoided after dark. Rumor said the quarry had been closed since '93, after a worker fell into the deep pit and drowned in the rainwater that had collected at the bottom. Kids used to dare each other to go there on Halloween, but even that tradition faded after a teenager vanished in 2006. So when the glow appeared, pale, almost bluish, like a giant lantern behind the trees, people noticed. And when the first body turned up the following morning, they understood that the glow wasn't a harmless curiosity. The morning after, Sheriff Paul Kincaid arrived at the scene just after 6 a.m., coffee in hand, the crisp autumn air still holding a trace of mist. The radio call had been vague: possible body found, Quarry Road. He'd expected maybe a drunk hunter or another meth lab dump site. He was not prepared for what he saw. The body lay on the shoulder of the dirt road, positioned neatly, almost ceremoniously. Female, early 20s, blonde hair fanned out over the gravel as if arranged by careful hands. She wore a white dress, the kind you might wear to a summer wedding, but the fabric was stained with something dark and wet. The most unsettling detail was the face. It was turned toward the trees, eyes wide open, as though she had died mid-shock. "Jesus," Deputy Margot Hall muttered beside him, covering her mouth. Paul crouched, noting the details. No drag marks. No blood pooled under her, meaning she hadn't been killed here. And then he saw it, a faint shimmer clinging to her skin, like fine glitter but paler, almost phosphorescent. "You see that?" Paul asked. Margot leaned closer. "It's glowing." It was faint in the daylight, but unmistakable. A dusting of light, as if her body had been dipped in powdered moonlight, identifying the victim. By 9 a.m., the county coroner, Dr. Evelyn Marks, had arrived. She was in her late 50s, methodical, and completely unshaken by death, but even she paused at the strange luminescence. "I've never seen anything like this," Evelyn said. "Not natural. We'll test for chemicals, but it's unusual." Inside the woman's dress pocket was a train ticket stub. Clearwater to Portland, September 22nd, 8:45 p.m. That was less than 12 hours before she'd been found. No ID, no phone, no purse. By midday, Paul had the victim identified: Emily Shore, 23, a college student from Portland. She'd last been seen boarding the northbound Amtrak in Portland the night before. According to her roommate, Emily had said she was going to visit a friend in Clearwater. She didn't say who. The train station footage. Clearwater's train station was hardly more than a single platform and a brick office building, with one security camera mounted over the ticket booth. Paul and Margot watched the grainy black and white footage from the night before. 8:42 p.m., the train pulled in. 8:44, passengers disembarked. Emily appeared in frame, white dress visible even in the poor resolution. She stepped onto the platform, looked around, then smiled and waved at someone off camera. A man entered the frame, tall, wearing a dark coat and hat. His face was angled away from the camera, and he seemed to avoid turning toward it. He took Emily's suitcase in one hand, placed his other hand gently on her back, and guided her toward the parking lot. They disappeared from view at 8:46 p.m. Rumors begin. By that evening, the glow was all over town. Someone claimed their cousin saw the light in the quarry again. A teenager swore they'd heard humming coming from the woods. The local Facebook group was full of speculation. Government experiment, alien abduction, some cursed mineral leaking from the ground. Paul didn't have time for rumors. He was focused on the fact that Emily Shore had been in Clearwater for less than an hour before ending up dead on Quarry Road. And that faint glowing dust. Lab results were still pending, but it already had him uneasy. The second glow. 2 nights later, the glow returned. This time, it was seen by a group of night fishermen at Bramble Creek, a mile from the quarry. They reported a ball of light hovering near the tree line before slowly fading. Paul drove out there himself, scanning the dark with his mag light. He found nothing until he checked the creek bank. There, half hidden in the reeds, lay another body. Male, early 30s, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans. Like Emily, he'd been placed neatly, face turned away from the road. And like Emily, his skin was dusted with that strange phosphorescent powder. Paul's stomach tightened. 2 victims in 3 days. Both deposited in isolated spots, both glowing faintly under the flashlight beam. The man's wallet identified him as Daniel Keene, 34, from Eugene. In his pocket, another train ticket stub. Eugene to Clearwater, September 24th, 6:20 p.m. The pattern. Back at the station, Paul laid the 2 ticket stubs side by side. Emily on the 22nd, Daniel on the 24th. Both had taken the train into town. Both had ended up dead within hours. Both had been covered in the glow. Think they knew each other? Margaret. Maybe, Paul said. Or maybe they had the same destination. The lab called later that afternoon. The glowing substance wasn't anything exotic. Not radioactive, not some rare mineral. It was a mix of magnesium powder and fine quartz particles, the kind used in certain theatrical effects and old-fashioned railroad signal lamps. The station agent, Clearwater station agent, Harold Fry, had worked there for nearly 40 years. A thin man with a nicotine cough and a permanent squint, Harold remembered both victims. "Yeah, I saw the girl," Harold said, tapping ash into a paper cup. "She stepped off the train, all dressed up like she was going somewhere fancy. Some fella met her. Tall long coat. Didn't catch his face." "And the man? Daniel Keene?" Paul asked. "Same thing," Harold said slowly. "Different night, but yeah, someone met him too. Tall coat. Moved like he knew where he was going." "Could it have been the same man?" Harold hesitated. "Could have been. Had the same, I dunno, vibe." The witness no one wanted. Paul's next lead came from an unexpected source, a drifter named Riley Moss, who sometimes slept behind the post office. Riley was known for tall tales and frequent run-ins with the law, but he claimed he'd been near the quarry the night Emily died. "Saw a light," Riley said, scratching at his beard. "Big one. Like a lantern the size of a car. And I saw them." "Them?" Paul prompted. "Man and a woman. She was walking funny, like she was dizzy. He was leading her toward the trees. I yelled, but they didn't hear." "Could you describe him?" Riley's eyes narrowed. "Tall. Long coat. Face was blurry. Like when you look through heat waves." Paul felt a shiver. "And the light?" "Gone in a blink," Riley said. "Like it went out when they stepped into the dark." The town on edge. By the end of the week, everyone in Clearwater had heard about the glow. Parents kept kids inside after dark. Train arrivals were watched nervously, as if the next passenger off would be the next victim. Paul requested Amtrak send a manifest of every passenger who had recently disembarked in Clearwater. One name caught his eye, someone scheduled to arrive in 2 days. A 19-year-old woman named Claire Denvers. According to her booking, she was traveling alone, coming from Seattle. He didn't know why, but he felt it in his gut. If he didn't act, Claire Denvers might become the 3rd glowing body. Preparing for the 3rd night. On the night of Claire's scheduled arrival, Paul and Margot set up surveillance at the station. 2 unmarked cars, one officer inside the platform building, another in the parking lot. Paul had arranged for Claire to be discreetly intercepted and escorted before anyone could approach her. The train rolled in at 9:10 p.m. Claire stepped off, young, carrying a small backpack, looking around nervously. Paul started toward her and then froze. Because there, stepping from the shadows at the far end of the platform, was a tall man in a long dark coat. The same gait, the same deliberate movement. And for just an instant, Paul could have sworn the air around him shimmered, like the faint glow of a lantern burning without flame. And that was when the first real chase began. The weather had turned cruel overnight. The wind howled between the tenement blocks like a wounded animal, rattling loose shutters and sending plastic bags skittering down the street. Street lamps flickered, throwing erratic pools of amber light across the cracked pavement. It was the kind of night where the city felt hollow, as if all warmth had retreated indoors and only the restless and the desperate remained outside. Detective Elaine Carter pulled her scarf higher against her face, her breath forming quick bursts of fog in the icy air. She'd been walking the block for nearly an hour, tracing the perimeter of the last known location of Michelle Vargas, the missing 22-year-old who had been the subject of her investigation for the past 10 days. 10 days of thin leads, contradictory witness accounts, and a growing dread in her stomach that Michelle's case would end the same way too many others had. She just passed the closed-up bodega on West 9th when she saw him. He was standing perfectly still at the far end of the block, half in shadow, half illuminated by the faulty glow of a street lamp. The man's face was hidden by the brim of a wide, worn hat, but his most distinct feature was the long, dark coat that swayed slightly in the wind. The fabric looked heavy, almost antique, and somehow out of place in this neighborhood. Elaine slowed her pace, watching him. At first, she thought he might be a homeless man or just some eccentric resident. But then he turned his head, slowly, deliberately, in her direction. Even from 40 feet away, she could feel the weight of his gaze. It wasn't curious or nervous. It was knowing. The detective's instincts screamed at her. She stepped toward him, her hand brushing the holster at her hip. "Evening," she called out, her voice carrying across the street. The man didn't answer. He simply shifted his posture slightly, as if preparing to move. The wind tugged at his coat again, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw something glint from beneath the hem. "Sir, I'd like to ask you a few questions," she said, quickening her pace. Her boots crunched against the icy pavement. He stepped backward into the darkness. Elaine cursed under her breath and moved into a jog. "Stop. Police!" The man turned and walked away, not running, just moving with unnerving calmness, before disappearing down an alley. Elaine broke into a full sprint, her pulse hammering in her ears. She reached the mouth of the alley just in time to catch the faint sound of footsteps fading into the distance. The alley itself was a narrow canyon of brick and rusting fire escapes. Puddles reflected the weak light from a lone bulb above a steel door halfway down. Elaine swept her flashlight across the walls. No movement. No sound except the rattle of a loose chain somewhere above her. And then she saw it. A small scrap of paper, caught in the wind, tumbling toward her feet. She stepped on it before it could blow away. Bending down, she picked it up and saw it was a torn photograph. The edges were frayed, and the image itself was faded, but it clearly showed a young woman, smiling, holding a mug of coffee at what looked like a diner. Elaine's chest tightened. It was Michelle Vargas. But someone had drawn over her face with black ink, crossing it out completely. Elaine's gloved fingers clenched around the photo. This wasn't random. The man in the long coat had been waiting for her, or at least expecting her to be there. He'd left her this, like a warning. She spent another 20 minutes searching the alley, but the man had vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of cigarette smoke and the sound of a metal gate swinging in the wind. Finally, with frustration burning in her gut, she headed back toward her car. On her way, she noticed something else, something she hadn't spotted before. Across the street from where the man had been standing was a boarded-up newsstand. On the plywood covering the front, someone had spray-painted a strange symbol, a circle with a vertical slash through the center. It looked like a crude zero with a line drawn down the middle. Elaine snapped a photo with her phone. She didn't know why, but it felt connected. That night, she sat in her cramped apartment with a photo of Michelle spread on the table beside her laptop. She'd run the symbol through every database she had access to: gang markings, occult references, graffiti tags, but nothing matched exactly. At midnight, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're looking in the wrong places." Elaine's throat went dry. She typed back quickly, "Who is this?" No response. But a moment later, another text arrived, a blurry, grainy image. It showed the same street she'd been on earlier that evening. The timestamp in the corner read 10:14 p.m., exactly when she'd first seen the man in the long coat. In the photo, she was standing under the street lamp, looking straight toward the camera. Someone had been watching her. Elaine stayed awake until dawn, staring at the torn photograph of Michelle and that strange symbol, knowing in her gut that the man in the long coat wasn't finished. This wasn't just about a missing person anymore. It was about her. The rain had stopped, but the streets of Oakford glistened with puddles that reflected the flickering orange glow of the few working street lamps. The rest were either out or buzzing faintly, as though they, too, were tired of illuminating the secrets of this town. Hannah Caldwell gripped the steering wheel tighter than she realized, the vinyl biting into her palms. She'd been driving for nearly an hour, looping through back roads that even she, a lifelong resident, barely recognized. The address she had scribbled down, 46 Devlin Street, sat in her passenger seat like a quiet dare. She had no reason to go there. Not really. Not unless you counted the gnawing curiosity that had kept her awake the past 2 nights since she saw the man in the long coat disappear down an alley that seemed to lead nowhere. She had followed, of course, but lost him, replaced only by the feeling that something was watching her. Later, she overheard 2 mechanics at a gas station talking about an old Devlin Street property, one no one dared rent, because, as one of them said, the lights never come on. Not once. Not even when people try to live there. That had been enough for her. By the time she turned down Devlin Street, the atmosphere had already shifted. The rows of houses looked the same on paper, 2-story, clapboard siding, small porches, but something about their alignment felt wrong. As though each house had been pushed into place by someone who didn't quite understand human symmetry. The street was so quiet that Hannah could hear the ticking of her car's cooling engine when she finally parked. Number 46 stood halfway down the block, set back slightly further from the road than the others. Its windows were dark, reflective, and unsettlingly clean for a place that was supposedly abandoned. The paint on the siding had bubbled in odd patches, and the shutters on the second floor were slightly ajar, though there was no wind. Hannah killed the engine and sat in silence. Her breath clouded faintly in front of her, though it wasn't particularly cold. She thought about calling someone, her sister, maybe, but she knew what Emily would say, "Don't be stupid. Don't go in there." And yet here she was, opening the door, her boots making the soft crunch of wet gravel as she crossed the narrow front yard. She noticed something strange as she approached. There was no sound. No hum from the street lamps. No rustle of leaves. No distant bark of a dog. Even her footsteps felt muffled, as if the house itself had swallowed the air. The porch boards sagged beneath her weight, groaning faintly. She tried the front door. It gave instantly, swinging inward without resistance, revealing a pitch-black hallway that seemed to drink in the dim glow from outside. A smell wafted out, stale, like closed-up rooms and something faintly metallic. She hesitated in the doorway. "Hello," she called, her voice small. It didn't echo. It didn't carry. It just vanished. Stepping inside was like crossing an invisible line. The air was thick, and the darkness deeper than what should have been possible. Even when she pulled her phone from her pocket and switched on the flashlight, the beam didn't travel far. The light seemed to dissolve into the black, leaving only a narrow circle directly in front of her. The floor beneath her boots was dry, dustless, which unsettled her more than if it had been coated in years of neglect. The walls were bare. No wallpaper, no paint, just an uneven, grayish surface that looked almost damp. She moved forward, her light sweeping across a small table against the wall. On it sat a rotary phone, yellowed, heavy-looking, but with no cord connecting it to anything. As she reached for it, a faint sound drifted down the hallway. A hum. Not electric. Not mechanical. It was low and human. A man's voice, almost singing under his breath. She froze, her pulse quickening. She called out again, louder this time, "Is someone there?" The humming stopped. She waited, every muscle in her body screaming at her to turn and leave. But something about the silence after the hum, thicker, heavier, pushed her onward. The hallway ended in a staircase. Her flashlight beam trembled slightly as she looked up. The steps disappeared into the same consuming darkness. She tested the first step. It creaked, but held. By the third step, the air felt warmer, like someone had been living here moments ago. A faint smell of cigarette smoke mingled with that metallic tang. Halfway up, she heard a soft click behind her. She turned sharply. The front door was now shut. She was almost certain she hadn't touched it. Her breathing quickened. She considered going back down, but then she saw it. On the landing above, barely visible in the dim beam of her phone light, stood a figure. It was tall, wearing a long coat, the same man she'd seen on the street 2 nights ago. His head was tilted, as though curious about her presence. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. The man didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't step back. He only stood, and the longer she looked at him, the more she realized she couldn't see his face. Not in the way light usually fails to reveal. It was as though his face simply wasn't there. Her fight or flight instinct screamed, and flight won. She stumbled back down the stairs, nearly tripping. She didn't look behind her until she reached the hallway. When she did, the staircase was empty. She ran to the front door, grabbed the knob. It turned, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as though something was holding it shut from the outside. Her heart pounded in her ears. She turned back toward the hallway, looking for another exit. That's when she saw the living room door ajar. The room beyond was lit, not with bulbs or lamps, but with a faint, pulsating glow that seemed to come from nowhere. She stepped inside cautiously, and the light shifted, almost like it was aware of her. The walls in here were different, smooth, almost glossy. In the center of the room sat a single wooden chair. On it was a photograph. She moved closer. The photograph showed a group of people standing in front of number 46. They were dressed in clothes from several different decades, 1920s, 1950s, 1980s, but they all shared one unsettling detail. Every face was blurred, smeared like wet paint. A faint hum began again, this time directly behind her. She turned. The man in the long coat stood in the doorway. Up close, he was taller than she expected, easily over 6 feet, and the coat was heavy, wool, frayed at the edges. His head tilted the other way now, but where his face should have been was only shifting shadow. As she backed away, the humming grew louder. She clutched her phone tighter, aiming the flashlight directly at him, but the beam bent around his head, as though the darkness itself was pushing it aside. Her back hit the far wall. The hum stopped, and in that silence, a whisper, not from him, but from all around her, slid into her ears. "You shouldn't have come here." The light in the room flickered violently, and for a split second she saw faces in the walls. Dozens of them, pressed into the surface, their mouths open in silent screams. Then darkness slammed down like a lid. When the light returned, the man was gone. So was the photograph. The door to the living room stood wide open, revealing the hallway, and beyond it, the front door, now hanging ajar as if nothing had ever been wrong. Hannah didn't hesitate. She bolted through it, not daring to look back, sprinting across the yard, fumbling with her car keys. Once inside, she locked the doors and started the engine with shaking hands. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Number 46 stood quiet and dark, except for one upstairs window, where a faint orange glow pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. The rain began just after midnight, light at first, then swelling into a heavy downpour that smothered the streets in a blanket of white noise. For most people in Graston, the sound was comforting, cleansing. But for Detective Aaron Cole, it was the kind of weather that seemed to pry open the cracks in the human mind and invite bad things inside. He stood under the canopy of his sedan, collar turned up, watching the rivulets run down the windshield. He had parked a block away from the address on the tip they'd received. Anonymous call. Male voice. Said there was a house where things weren't right. The dispatcher had tried to press for details, but the caller hung up. The only concrete lead was an address and a warning. If you go, don't go alone. Cole hadn't gone alone. Officer Dana Harlow was already in position across the street, peering from behind the frame of a boarded-up laundromat. She caught his gaze and tapped her earpiece. "Still no movement," she said quietly. Cole scanned the street. The house in question was a sagging two-story Victorian, all peeling paint and crooked shutters. The rain blurred the outline, but even from here, it looked like a place that hadn't been lived in for years. No lights. No signs of life. The kind of place kids dared each other to run up to on Halloween. But as he stared, he thought he saw something, just for a moment, behind the second-story window. A silhouette. "Did you catch that?" Cole asked into the calm. "Catch what?" "Second floor. Left window." "I've been watching that window for 20 minutes, Dana replied. "Nothing." Cole hesitated, then stepped out into the rain. It hit him in cold sheets, plastering his hair to his forehead and soaking his jacket almost instantly. His shoes splashed in the puddles as he made his way toward the fence. The gate was hanging open. He froze, scanning the shadows. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you left your gate swinging in a storm. It would slam against the post all night, and everyone would hear it. He touched the wood. The latch was broken clean through. Recently. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something sharper, iron, maybe. "Blood." "Dana," he said, keeping his voice low. "Latch is busted. Going in." "Copy that. I'll cover you." Cole pushed through, boots sinking into the overgrown grass. The rain muffled every other sound. He mounted the sagging porch steps, each one creaking under his weight. The front door was ajar, but just barely, open enough to see darkness beyond. He drew his flashlight, clicked it on, and pushed the door wider. The beam revealed a hallway lined with old wallpaper, water-stained and peeling. A smell of damp wood and rot hung in the air. The floor was warped from years of neglect, and every step felt like it might break through. Cole stepped inside. Water dripped somewhere deeper in the house, each drop landing with a hollow plink that seemed unnaturally loud. The sound of the rain outside felt distant now, muted, as though he'd stepped into a different world entirely. He checked the first door on the right, empty room. Broken chair, overturned dresser. A pile of yellowed newspapers from the 1970s. To the left, the kitchen. Dusty counters, an old iron stove. But what caught his eye was the set of muddy footprints leading from the back door into the hallway. They weren't his. Cole crouched, shining the light over them. The tread was strange, smooth sole, no defined pattern, but narrow. Almost delicate, barely an adult size. They were fresh, the water still glistening in them. His earpiece crackled. "Cole, I'm picking up movement. First floor toward the back." "Got it," he murmured. He followed the trail. The prints led him down the hallway, toward a closed door. He paused, listening. The rain outside had shifted direction, rattling against the side of the house. Underneath it, he thought he heard something else, a whisper. Not a voice over the radio. Not the wind. It was low, almost impossible to make out. But it was definitely words. Cole pressed closer to the door, straining to hear. The whisper rose, just slightly, and his stomach turned. It was repeating his name. "Aaron." He yanked the door open. The beam cut through dust and shadow to reveal a narrow stairway descending into the basement. The whispering stopped instantly. The space below was pitch black. Cole descended slowly, one step at a time, the wood groaning under his weight. The air grew colder, damper. At the bottom, his light swept across the concrete floor and froze. A chair sat in the center of the basement, facing away from him. A thin, pale hand dangled from the side, unmoving. "Police," Cole called. "Show me your hands." No response. He circled the chair, keeping his flashlight steady, and stopped short. It wasn't a living person. It was a mannequin. An old, cracked mannequin, its plastic skin yellowed with age. A long coat hung from its shoulders. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed its blank, eyeless face. And pinned to the chest was a Polaroid photograph. Cole plucked it free, keeping it in the beam of his light. The photo showed a person standing in the rain. From tonight. From maybe 20 minutes ago. The angle was from across the street. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Dana's voice snapped into his ear. We've got someone moving on the second floor. Wait. Her words cut out in a burst of static. Dana? Say again. Nothing. Just static. Cole took the stairs 2 at a time, the Polaroid clenched in his fist. He reached the first floor and turned toward the staircase to the second. The wood groaned above him. Dana? He tried again, his voice lower now. Still nothing. He climbed, each step feeling like it was pushing him deeper into the belly of something alive and waiting. The upstairs hallway was even darker than the first floor. A single door stood open at the far end. Lightning flashed through a cracked window, illuminating a figure in the doorway. Motionless, wearing a long coat. Cole lifted his flashlight, and the doorway was empty. He strode forward, heart pounding. The room beyond was bare except for a single item in the center, a tape recorder. It clicked on by itself. The whisper returned. Not from the room, but from the recorder. Aaron, you're too late. Then, from somewhere deep inside the house, another sound rose over the storm. Not a whisper. A scream. The scream tore through the night like a blade. It wasn't the sharp, quick kind that punctures silence and dies away. No, this was long. Drawn out. A sound that felt like it had been trapped somewhere for years and was finally breaking free, clawing its way into the air. Lena froze in the middle of the road, her flashlight beam quivering as it spilled weak light onto the cracked asphalt. It was 1:14 a.m. The rain had just started again, soft at first, then harder, tapping at her hood. She was halfway between the main street and that old, sagging house with the boarded windows. The scream kept going. It wasn't human anymore. It had started that way, high-pitched and desperate, but now it carried something else. A vibration. A second tone buried underneath, almost mechanical. She didn't realize she'd started moving until she was halfway to the source. Earlier that night, Lena had been replaying the conversation she'd had with Detective Morell. You hear anything strange out here, you call me first. Not the police station. Got it? I'm not your partner, she'd replied. Right now, you're the only one who's seen what I've seen. That makes you more useful than my own damn partner. The way he'd said it made her skin prickle. Now, as she neared the intersection, she thought about his words and wondered if she should call him, if she even had time. The sound was louder now, bouncing off wet walls and echoing between buildings. It was coming from an old drainage lot next to the tracks. The chain-link fence sagged in the middle, and Lena ducked under without thinking. She stepped into ankle-deep mud, her flashlight beam sliding across the ground until it hit something white, fabric, fluttering in the wind. At first, she thought it was just an old tarp, but then the scream jolted again, and the fabric moved. It was a dress. A woman was standing in the mud, facing away from her, soaked to the bone. Her hair clung to her head, and her arms hung limp at her sides. The scream was still going, though the woman's mouth was closed. Lena's heart began to hammer. Hey, she called. Her voice cracked against the rain. The woman didn't turn around. Lena took a step closer, the mud sucking at her boots. Do you need help? That's when she noticed the shadow behind the woman. At first, it looked like the outline of a man, tall and still, standing just inches away from her. But as Lena squinted through the rain, she realized the shadow wasn't on the ground. It was upright, three-dimensional. It shifted. Slowly. The scream cut off. The silence hit harder than the noise had. The woman's head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, in one smooth motion, she turned to face Lena. Her eyes were wide. Too wide. And her skin, pale as porcelain, but not in a way that suggested life. The scream began again, but her mouth still didn't move. Lena stumbled back, nearly losing her grip on the flashlight. The sound was louder now, like it was coming from inside her own head. The shadow stepped forward. She turned and ran. Her boots slipped in the mud, the fence scraping her jacket as she ducked under it again. The scream followed her, bouncing in her skull even though she was sure she was far enough away to have lost it. When she reached Main Street, her phone buzzed violently in her pocket. She snatched it out, an unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello. The scream came through the speaker. Only this time, there was a voice beneath it. You shouldn't have followed her. The line went dead. Lena staggered into the tiny laundromat at the corner, the bell over the door clanging loudly. The place was empty except for the hum of the dryers. She leaned against one, trying to catch her breath. She wanted to believe she'd imagined it, that maybe it was a prank, some drunk playing around in the rain. But the mud on her boots, the sound still echoing faintly in her ears, told her otherwise. Then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The glass door of the dryer in front of her was fogged from the heat. But drawn into the condensation, in shaky, jagged letters, were the words. "Stop looking." She didn't remember leaving the laundromat. One moment she was staring at the message. The next she was outside again, the rain pounding harder. Her phone buzzed once more. This time it was Detective Morel. "Where are you?" he demanded the moment she picked up. There was a scream. "I know. We've been getting calls about it for the last 10 minutes. His voice was tight. "Lena, listen to me very carefully. If you saw her, you need to tell me now." She hesitated. "Saw who?" "The woman in white." That night, Lena didn't sleep. She sat in her kitchen, dripping rainwater onto the tile, staring at her phone. She'd wanted answers for weeks, answers about the house, the man in the long coat, the whispers in the rain. Now she wasn't sure she wanted them at all. At 3:22 a.m., her phone buzzed one last time. No number. No caller ID. She answered. The scream came again. This time so loud she had to pull the phone away from her ear. But even from that distance, she heard it change. The human tone dropped away, leaving only that low, mechanical vibration. And then, beneath it, a whisper. "You're next." By the time Detective Mendez returned to the motel parking lot, the rain had lessened to a fine mist, but the night felt heavier than before, thicker somehow, like the air was holding its breath. The sodium vapor lights overhead painted everything in a jaundiced glow, and the asphalt shimmered like oil underfoot. Room 6 still stood with its door shut, the thin curtain drawn across the window. From the outside, it looked perfectly ordinary, if you ignored the fact that the other guests had all quietly retreated into their rooms and not a single voice could be heard anywhere in the complex. Mendez approached slowly. She didn't knock right away. She just stood at the door, straining her ears. There was a faint creak inside. A floorboard. Then silence. She rapped twice. "Mr. Hall? It's Detective Mendez. I'd like to ask you a few more questions." Nothing. She knocked harder. "Sir, I need you to open the door." The knob turned. The door opened a fraction, but it wasn't Hall standing there. It was no one. The chain was still in place, the gap no wider than an inch, and beyond it the room was dark. Completely dark. "Mr. Hall?" she called, but the only response was the wet, faint sound of something dripping onto carpet. She unclipped the chain with practiced ease and stepped inside. The moment she did, she realized why the room was so dark. Every lamp had been unplugged, the bathroom light off, the television's cable pulled from the wall. The smell hit next, damp wood and something faintly metallic. Her flashlight beam swept the bed, rumpled sheets, no one in them. The bathroom, empty. And then she saw it. The window. The one she had distinctly noted earlier that evening was painted shut, its edges crusted with decades of beige layers. Now it was open, only a few inches, but enough to let in the damp night air. A small puddle had formed on the carpet beneath it from the mist outside. Her heart rate picked up. She stepped closer, running her light over the sill. Flakes of paint clung to the edges like scabs torn open. Someone had forced it. And on the sill, pressed into the damp wood, were the clear impressions of fingertips. Too long. Too thin. She leaned out, shining her beam into the empty parking lot. There was no one there, but the rainwater running down the outside wall showed a clear smear, like something had slid down it, too slowly to be human. Behind her, the sound of the dripping stopped. She turned sharply, light sweeping across the room again, and froze. The bed was exactly as it had been moments ago, except the sheets were damp now, wet all the way through. And lying right in the center was a single object, an old motel room key, brass and scratched, with a plastic fob that read room 6 in faded block letters. Mendez reached for her radio. It didn't work. Static filled her ears, but under it, Faintly, she heard a voice. Not on the radio. In the room. It whispered her name. She spun toward the sound, toward the open window, but the voice was suddenly right behind her ear. And the curtain over the window began to billow, not inward, but outward, like something was leaving. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the town wrapped in a damp, gray fog that seemed reluctant to lift. The events of the previous night, of the open window and the strange absence of any footprints, had settled over Mia and Detective Klein like a suffocating shroud. Sleep had been nearly impossible. Every creak of the house, every shift of the old wood, felt like a whisper from something unseen. Klein was the first to break the silence over breakfast. "I'm going to have the house examined," he said flatly, his voice low as if the walls themselves might be listening. "If there's a way in, we'll find it." Mia stirred her tea without drinking it, eyes fixed on the table. "It's not just about a way in. Whoever's doing this, they're in here somehow. I feel it." He gave her a long look. "I know." By midday, Klein had brought in 2 men from the department, Officer Ramirez and a contractor named Burke who specialized in home security. They combed through the place with flashlights, tapping walls, opening crawl spaces, measuring vents. Burke's voice echoed down the hall. "This place is a maze. Too many false panels. I've seen old houses with hidden passages before, but this," he trailed off. Mia kept her distance, watching them move from room to room. Every so often she thought she caught a faint sound, a breath, a hum, the kind of noise you couldn't prove you'd heard until it was gone. Then it happened. She was standing in the upstairs hallway, her back to the wall near her bedroom door, when a voice came through. Not from down the hall. Not from a room. From inside the wall itself. It was a man's voice, low and ragged, almost playful. "Do you still hear me, little bird?" Mia's blood froze. She pressed her ear to the plaster, heart pounding. "Who's there?" she whispered before realizing how absurd it was to speak to a wall. The voice chuckled. A slow, deliberate sound. "I've always been here." Her scream brought Klein running, gun drawn, with Ramirez and Burke on his heels. "What happened?" Klein barked. "The wall," she pointed, trembling. "There's someone in the wall." They tore at the wallpaper, finding nothing but old wood and insulation. Burke muttered, "This house has pockets in its design, little voids between floors and rooms. If someone knew the structure, they could move around inside without being seen," Klein finished grimly. Ramirez shone his flashlight into a narrow seam along the floorboard. The beam vanished into darkness that seemed to stretch far deeper than it should. "He's in there," Ramirez said. "Has to be." That night, Mia refused to sleep alone. She camped in the living room with Klein nearby, a chair pulled up close to the couch. For hours, there was nothing but silence. Then, past midnight, it came again. The voice, faint but unmistakable, drifting from somewhere above them. "You can board me in, detective. You can seal the cracks. But you can't stop the house from breathing." The floorboards creaked. Somewhere deep within the walls, something was moving. And it was getting closer. Detective Henry Cole had been in more crime scenes than he could count. Basements that reeked of rot, attics filled with rat droppings, motel rooms soaked in blood. But he had never seen anything that made his skin crawl quite like the narrow opening at the end of the Wilkins house's hallway. It was small, maybe 2 feet wide, half hidden behind a wardrobe that had been dragged away by forensics. The wall around it was uneven, patched up with old plaster and a fresh coat of beige paint. If you weren't looking closely, you'd think it was nothing more than a strange quirk in the architecture. But the smell, it was faint, yet distinct. Metallic. And something else, like old sweat that had been trapped for years. "Crawl space goes under the whole house," said Officer Reyes, crouching beside it. "Blueprints show it's about 3 feet high at most points. No official access point except this one." Henry knelt, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam revealed wooden beams coated in dust, spiderwebs swaying in the draft, and a dirt floor that looked disturbed, patches of loose soil and marks like something or someone had been dragged. He didn't like it. Not one bit. "Bring me the snake cam," Henry ordered. The tech handed him the flexible camera line, and Henry threaded it inside, watching the grainy live feed on the monitor. The crawl space seemed to stretch forever, the low ceiling pressing down. At first it was just dirt, debris, and insulation that looked chewed through by rats. Then the camera caught something. A shoe. Not just any shoe, it was a small, glittery pink sneaker, caked in grime. The kind a little girl might wear. Henry froze. "Mark that spot," he said, his voice sharp. He kept pushing the camera further, heart pounding. The air in the crawl space looked thicker somehow, like the dust had been disturbed recently. And then, the camera feed shifted to reveal a small bundle. A child's backpack. Purple, faded, with a dangling unicorn keychain. A cold dread crawled up Henry's spine. That backpack had been in the missing persons report from 7 years ago, the Wilkins family's niece, Jamie. Officially, her disappearance had been labeled as a runaway. But Henry knew now. Jamie never ran away. The team suited up. They widened the opening and began to crawl inside one by one. Henry followed, the tight space forcing him to keep his shoulders hunched. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell got. His flashlight cut through the dark, revealing more scratches along the beams, long and frantic, like someone had tried to claw their way out. Rhea's voice was tense in the beam of Henry's light. "Over here, sir." Henry crawled closer. Rhea's light was fixed on a mound of loose dirt. As they dug, the smell became unbearable. And then they uncovered the first thing. A pale, bony hand, the nails broken and jagged. Henry swallowed hard. "Call the coroner. Now." But they weren't done. At the far end of the crawl space, Henry's flashlight revealed something else, something worse than the remains. A mattress. Old, stained, pressed flat from years of weight. Beside it sat a small stack of objects. A flashlight, a cracked mirror, and a notebook. Henry picked it up with gloved hands. The first page was covered in frantic writing, the same words repeated again and again. "I can hear him breathing." Somewhere above them, the house creaked. And Henry realized they weren't alone. The first time Evelyn heard it, she thought it was the wind. A slow, hollow exhalation drifting through the darkness of her bedroom. She had been lying there, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close her eyes after what she'd seen in the crawlspace. But this wasn't the house groaning. It wasn't the heater kicking on. It was deliberate, measured, human. She held her breath, straining her ears. The sound came again, low and rasping, like someone trying to inhale through lungs that had been filled with water. Evelyn shot upright, scanning the room. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. She turned toward the far wall, the one that backed onto the closet. It was coming from inside. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, but her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. The dim blue glow from the screen lit her face as she opened her flashlight app, slowly sliding out of bed. The breathing stopped. That should have made her feel safer, but instead, it made the air feel heavier. Like whatever was making the sound was now listening to her. She approached the closet, the wooden floor cold under her bare feet. Her toes curled instinctively as the beam of light swept over the door. Nothing. She almost laughed at herself, until the breathing started again. Louder this time. It was so close she could hear a wet rattle at the end of each exhale. Her fingers found the closet handle. She hesitated. Then, in a single motion, she flung it open. Empty. The beam of light danced over her clothes, her shoes, and the dark space in the far back. That's when she saw it. 2 tiny holes in the plaster at the base of the wall, perfectly round, like something had drilled through from the other side. And as she crouched down, the breathing became deafening. It was on the other side of the wall. Evelyn stumbled back, her heel hitting the nightstand. The lamp tipped over and crashed to the floor. She didn't care. She was already scrambling for the door. But as her hand touched the knob, she heard something else through those tiny holes, words, whispered so softly they were almost lost in the rattle of breath. "I can see you." The police floodlights washed the house in stark white, making every shadow seem sharper, every corner more threatening. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk behind yellow tape, their murmured questions and nervous glances adding a strange sense of normalcy to a night that was anything but. I stood on the porch, my hands still trembling from what I'd seen in the crawlspace, the pale figure that wasn't quite dead, and the sound of breathing that didn't stop even after they'd carried her out. Detective Morrison came up behind me. "You need to hear this," he said quietly. They led me back inside. The living room, now stripped of furniture, revealed warped floorboards and walls discolored from years of moisture. A forensics tech was prying open a section of the wall beneath the staircase, where faint scratching noises had been heard earlier. The panel came away with a groan, releasing a smell so foul it made me gag. Inside was a small, windowless compartment. Morrison shone his flashlight in, and I saw them, photographs. Hundreds of them. Followed me. Some taken from across the street, some through my bedroom window, and some from inside the house. Morrison's voice was grim. "We think he was living here. Not just recently. For years." I stared at the photographs, my skin crawling. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The answer came when another officer called from upstairs. "We found the attic door. It's been nailed shut from the inside." They pried it open. The attic was pitch black, save for a narrow beam of light from the officer's flashlight. Dust swirled in the air like ash. And then I saw it. A makeshift bed, piles of empty food wrappers, and more photographs, these of the house's previous owners. It dawned on me then. This wasn't about me. I was just the next in a line of tenants. Someone had been here long before I moved in, watching whoever lived in the house, learning their routines, moving through the walls like a shadow. But the truly sickening part was the journal they found beside the bed. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. "She's finally started hearing me. I think she likes it." I left that night and never returned. The house was condemned weeks later. The neighbors say it's still empty, but some swear that on certain nights, you can see a light flicker in the attic, just for a moment. And if you stand close enough to the siding, you might hear it too. That slow, steady breathing.